Sure. And here we are with Dr. Misia Gervis. I called you doctor. Um, for our very first episode of the Tough Through Tender Critical Conversations podcast series. Misia, thank you so much for joining me. You are a creator of many, many things, including the Tough Through Tender transformational program, which we'll get into. But I really kind of want to get into how you got to where you are today. So we'll just start right at the beginning. But first of all, I'll just ask you, how are you doing today?
I'm doing okay, thanks, Nick. There's no snow, so I'm happy. That's
You're,
what I
but
can say.
it is bitingly cold out there. I'm not happy with the cold.
Cold, sunshine, blue skies, I can do that all day long. It's just grey, grim snow doesn't work for
Doesn't work for you. Well, let's find out why that doesn't work for you.
me.
I'm going to, Misia, as you know, we're going to break this podcast into 3 20-minute periods, like in ice hockey, and also my general stories, which is like what it was like, what happened, and what things are like now. I really want to get into, the whole idea of what Tough Through Tender is and building resiliency through compassion and vulnerability and what we are offering as a platform. But being as this is your lifelong work. I've known you for almost 3 years now. I want to get into you. So I know that's a topic that you like to avoid a lot, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm better at doing other people.
Right. Okay. Well, let's Misha, I'm gonna start the 20 minutes. Hold on 2 seconds, because I have not been doing this. I've not been timing it very well. But our first 20 minutes, let's drop the puck. Here we go.
Okay.
Um, Misha, since we met, our lives for somehow have been interwoven with people that we've known from the past 20, 25 years ago in the gymnastics world. And then me getting back into ice hockey coaching at the Sobel Center in North London. And you saying, hey, Nick, I started coaching gymnastics there. And we've kind of looked at time frames, and it's a few decades ago. And I know a little bit of your story, and I want to kind of find out a little bit more. What was Misha's life like growing up, and how did you become that coach at the Sobel Center?
So, when I was little, the Sobel Centre was like a really exciting new sports complex that was built in northwest London, which is where I'm from. And it was the first of its kind in London. We hadn't really seen things like this before, a kind of big sports centre, lots and lots of places to do things. And I went there initially to do gymnastics as a kid, to do gymnastics. And because
How
of
old
my,
are you?
I don't know, 11, 10, 11,
Okay,
something
all
like
right.
that. Yeah. And because gymnastics being the sport that it is, by the time I was 14, 15, I was coaching and getting paid for it. So my friends were working, doing their part-time jobs in shops or doing whatever, and I was coaching. And I loved it. I love coaching. And it's a kind of a tradition, you kind of the older kids help with the younger kids because gymnastics starts at 2, 3. You have toddlers running around, so that's how that kind of system evolved. So that was my connection to gymnastics, but I kind of just loved sport, loved watching it, being around it, and that was kind of my happy place, if you like.
Mm. So, did you need a happy place?
Well, it was just everyone needs a happy place. It was yeah, I used to just enjoy doing it, love the feeling of it. Um and also just it's a space for expression and creativity and challenge, a lot of challenge. I mean, yeah. Go up on a 4-inch beam and see if you can't fall off. Okay, then I'll give it a go.
Even when you put the 4-inch beam on the floor and it's 2 inches above the floor, I'll fall off of it every time.
Yes, well, I did
Yeah,
too, many, many
yeah.
times. Um,
So when did you realize, like that's your early teens are very early on to recognize that you enjoyed helping other younger athletes? I mean, what was that feeling like? Where you kind of were like, this is where it really, I like being up on the beam, but I like showing other people how to get up onto the beam.
um, yeah, it just seemed to be easy for me to do that. I mean, I suppose if you if you look at a thread through my life, teaching in different shapes and different spaces and different contexts is really evident throughout it. So that is basically what I do. And that teaching for me is about empowerment, it's about sharing. And of course, now I've got very lovely, sophisticated words that I can use to describe it. But then when I'm 14, 15, it's like, yeah, I just like doing it. It's good fun. And someone's going to pay me to coach. Happy days.
I know gymnastics is a sport that you're still are writing white papers on. It's evolved a lot. We know what sport in general and sport culture is like. So how did you, like, were you pulled into this kind of this coaching ethos around, building, I suppose, toughness around gymnasts where, like these people push their bodies far beyond what they should be, I suppose, because it hurts. Like when did you start recognizing, I suppose, the pain that athletes needed to go to get to the top?
So no, honestly, because the club that I was in was not an elite high level performing club. It wasn't like one of those clubs that was churning out British championships. It was much more in a kind of rec space. Yes, we did competitions, but they were pretty low level. We did a lot of displays. We did, we put on shows, and we did all of that kind of stuff. So that culture really wasn't prevalent in when I was learning it, and certainly in and around the people that I was coaching with, older gymnasts from me. That wasn't part of the story there, actually. Interesting. It really wasn't.
How did you move on through getting your qualifications and getting further into, I suppose, your development as a you're still very young, you're still a teenager. But I'm still struck by the fact that you found this purpose at such a young age. So
I don't think I did. I mean, yes, okay, maybe I did and I didn't. Well, what happened then was that I moved out of Sobel. I stopped coaching there and I started coaching at another club called Westminster Gymnastics. And I started coaching rhythmic gymnastics. At the same time as I was doing this, I was a dancer. I was in productions. I was all of that kind of creativity bit. So what I used to love was creating. So creating floor routines, my idea of heaven. Working collaboratively with someone, the music, kind of creating a story, doing all of that. So that's how I kind of moved there. And then I started my degree in psychology. I kind of dovetailed the two things together. At the end of a degree, you have to do a dissertation, which is like a big independent piece of study. And I decided to do a bit of what looks like very straightforward sports psychology, but at the time, no one really quite understood it. So I set up this experiment with the gymnasts, whereby half of them were taught imagery skills to improve I think it was a cartwheel on a beam, something really simple. And then I had a pre and post design whereby I had judges, and the judges didn't know which group was the imagery group and which group was the control group. And then we assessed their progress pre and post. And oh, look, the people who've been working with imagery, they improved more than the people who didn't. So it was a innovative study in as much that it was in a sports setting and it was using imagery. And I got slaughtered for it. And my academic supervisor said, "I don't know what you think this is, Misia, but this is not psychology," in big red letters across the whole thing. I'm like, oh, okay then. So I was undeterred, and I basically wanted to. It made sense for me because by then, 21, I'm an experienced coach because I've been in coaching 7 years, right? So I'm experienced. I know what that looks like, what that feels like. And I'm thinking, I understand. And Westminster, we were trying to do things in a bit a more kind of elite way. We were trying to move things forward, definitely with a kind of rhythmic gymnastics and understanding all of that. And I could see synergies all the time, and understanding that how you feel impacts on how you perform. And I didn't quite have the language for it. I didn't quite understand what it was, but so I thought, okay, well, I'll combine the two and I'll go and do sports psychology. Now, at that time in England, you could not do sports psychology postgrad. Those degrees did not exist. They weren't anywhere. So I went to the States and did a postgraduate degree in sports psychology, where I was integrating these two things. And it's like, yes, here's psychology. That's good for me. That also felt like me in terms of caring for people, looking after people, kind of enhancement, all of that. That's a space that I've always lived in. But then put it in a sport context. So that year was quite interesting.
I want to get into, I want to find out more, but I want to ask you, what did it feel like when somebody wrote on a paper, this is not psychology? So let's define what was your feelings of what psychology is, and then and then how did you feel? You put this work into this paper, and to have someone shoot it down quite harshly,
Sure. Yeah, they did, and it impacted on my degree. My initial thought, fuck you, quite frankly, because you, Mr. Supervisor Man, who was supposed to come and see my work, who was supposed to come and supervise and see what we were doing, he never showed up. He never did what he was supposed to do. You don't get this, you don't understand this, but you don't get to define me. See you later. Be interesting, for him to go, yes, well, look at you, that classic, look at me now, because of course no one had heard of sports psychology, no one understood it, it didn't exist, it wasn't a discipline, people didn't really understand sport or elite sport, it was a completely alien thing, so his lack of openness and his lack of curiosity and his lack of forward thinking, why would I get sucked up in that?
We talk a lot about resiliency and whether or not resiliency is something that is inherent or is it something that can be taught. But knowing your story, it seems like there was always something inside of you that would be able to say, F you. Sure. But also you said the words, I was not deterred.
Yeah.
So where did that come from, Misha? How can you recognize that from? Let's even go with that 11-year-old who starts to gymnast, to a 14-year-old who starts coaching it, to a 21-year-old who can say, F you to a supervisor, but also say, I will not be deterred. I'm interested to know where that resiliency came from, and it was something that was born in you.
I think I've always just done things that I wanted to, I was interested in. I think we all hit bumps along the road, and certainly there were bumps along the road, but also the stuff that I did, I wasn't doing it because my mum was taking me to gymnastics. In fact, the opposite, she never came, ever. My parents didn't come and involve themselves in that. That was what you're doing, that's your thing over there, you get on and do it. So
do you think that was part of the resilience building, where was this a bit of an FU to your parents too for saying
no, it wasn't that. It was just like I liked doing it. I was happy doing it. I enjoyed being in that space. That space was good for me. It's like I went to school and got on the bus and got myself to gymnastics and did that and came home, and I guess it's that level of independence. So maybe that's what it is. It's like that thing.
Did you have brothers and sisters?
Oh, loads. Yeah.
Okay. Where were you in the family pecking order?
Well, I have one real brother, one real sister, 2 stepsisters on my mum's side, 2 stepsisters on my dad's side. So I'm in the middle somewhere.
You're in the middle. Was it like you trying maybe find to define yourself in a family environment too, where I'm going to be a gymnast and a coach and a sports psych?
I never thought that.
No.
I have never had a plan. I just do what I'm doing. But so this is what I want to be, and I must do this. I before I did my degree in psychology, I was doing a degree in biochemistry, and I was rubbish at it. I used to have chemistry all day on a Friday, and I hated it. I very rarely went, and so I failed. Part of my course was like I was doing kind of biochemistry with education, and with this education bit, there was a little bit of psychology, and I went, okay, I've got to start all over again, and it's a really good thing that I failed because I would have been a rubbish biochemist, but I'm a really good psychologist. Failing, picking myself up, starting all over again, doing a degree in psychology, that was actually really, really important that I did that and was able to do that. Yeah.
How did you find out about the courses in America? I mean, this is pre-Google days. You had to do a
There
lot
were
of
ways.
I want to find out about it because I
I can't
actually,
remember how I found out about it. I really can't. I think I must have just been looking and finding out about degrees in America. I literally can't remember, but you had to do another qualification called a GRE to get into an American university. So they don't just take the fact that I had an undergraduate degree, which is the system that works here. I had to do an additional test. I had to go and sit something in an American school and do all these multiple choice weirdnesses in order to hit some level or other. Anyway, I did all of that and kind of, got in and went to Florida State. Yeah.
in when I moved here in 1989, the first thing, and I was 18 years old, the first thing that I noted was that sport was behind, I would say behind the times. It was not as evolved in an organization way, in an elite athlete way, in a TV way as in North America. So I can understand why there was sports psychology degrees in North America than they are before here. So what was it like being a young woman going to Florida State and getting involved in a very masculine culture?
There were many things I learned about being in Florida State. The reason I went there was because there was a guy called Robert Singer, and Robert Singer wrote a lot of papers around sports psychology. So when I'm doing my research for my undergraduate degree, his name came up and Florida State, and then I found out that there was a program and thought, yes, I'll apply there, and was accepted and everything. The cultural shock for a kid who grew up in Camden Town, you think punk, you think there's. I was, I was very comfortable being in and around Camden Town. And then I get to Florida and some idiot is telling me that as a woman, somebody needs to walk me across campus. Didn't take too kindly to that. So that sexism was rife. This notion of, I remember someone asking me if my boyfriend had given me permission to come and do this. I'm like, are you kidding me? I couldn't believe the backwardness of the thinking. It was appalling. I couldn't believe the racism. That was appalling. I couldn't believe the Bible bashing, all of that culture. I couldn't believe the hypocrisy of it, actually, where people would be kind of going, oh, come to my church, and at the same time being really racist. I'm like, aren't you lot supposed to be all about love and kindness, and you're behaving like this? Did my head in. So yeah, America was challenging for me. Tallahassee, very different from Camden Town, just saying.
It is. The only thing I know about Tallahassee is the capital of Florida, and there was a hockey team there. Where you start to see that, I see this young woman who's very independent, very strong, very determined, purpose-driven, even though she might not even be aware of it. Single-minded. I also, not single-minded, but very focused. What was your reaction like to this sexism and racism? How did it make you feel?
I used to be flabbergasted about it. I remember one situation. So you imagine gyms whereby they have like, the gym is down here and they have classrooms around the edge, and then that's where a lot of the sports psychology, where we were doing our kind of learning. And I remember I was talking about something to do with equality, gender, something like that. And down in the floor, on the gym floor, the cheerleaders were practicing. And I took everybody out of the classroom and I said, look, this is what I'm talking about. Everyone looked at me blankly like, what? I'm like, well, what you allow women to do is to stand on the sidelines and cheer their men. I call bullshit on that. And they were like, didn't quite get it. I don't think they've run into people like me recently, you know. It's but you know, feminist, was I feminist? Yes. Is my mum a feminist? Hell to the yes. Is that how I grew up? Yeah, you're a woman, so what? Go and do whatever you want to do. That's that's the environment that I grew up in, with smart women doing important things. So that was just like, well, that's just what you do. You know, it's not an exception. It wasn't an exception. It's just like that's what you do. So that was interesting. I also remember being amazed about the amount of football money that they put into the football program.
American football, yeah.
American football, yeah, and what that was all about, and the power of that program. And I kind of made friends with athletes, and there was a coach there, an athletics coach there, who I kind of chatted with. I think he was English, but yeah, and it was quite an international course, so there were people from other places, and that made it easier. I didn't understand the American psyche, if I'm honest.
I'm just trying to think of my knowledge of sport, you know, is not great. I mean, it's better than average, but I'm also thinking, like, with regards to a woman who's doing a sports psychology degree, who's also a gymnastics coach, the sexualization of gymnastics, figure skating, and even, you know, track and field events. It seems like those are the sports. Sorry, those are the sports that seem. Is that our timer already? That's the timer. That's one period gone.
Okay.
That's so. I suppose we'll end this on this. I want to get into. I suppose if you can just recap the sexualization of women in sport, and you going to a very misogynistic and a patriarchy, you know, in terms of American football, that culture in Southern Florida. You know, how did that make you feel? And then is there like the evolution of that, of I guess, like those where women fit into sport? Did you feel yourself as kind of this, I'm going to get in, like this thing of like, I've learned this from my mom, I'm going to get into any aspect of it? Or was it this thing of like, I can only think about gymnastics or figure skating or track and field where women are accepted in sport?
None of that. It literally didn't happen like that, either of those things. When I was in America, I coached gymnastics because that paid me, and that meant that I could afford to pay my fees and get myself through school. But also, as I said, the bits about gymnastics that I love is the creativity, is the choreography. And because in gymnastics in America, it's a middle class rich sport, and this was unheard of for me. People would pay me to choreograph floor routines. I'm like, oh my God, there's money to be made here. And I was desperately poor. I was working like 5 jobs, cleaning loos, working in a prison, coaching gymnastics, reading textbooks, because I was having to do an awful lot to pay my way through uni. But gymnastics was then, it was just familiar territory. You know, it was like, oh, okay, I know what this looks like. I can do this. And there were some people who were really kind to me in gymnastics, actually, really kind. And there were the Dennies who were lovely, who I coached their daughter, and we got on really well, and they looked after me, and for that I'll be eternally grateful. And they kind of, like, I don't know, you know, you're kind of a quirky foreigner, you know, you're a bit weird, you're a bit out there, so you're allowed to be different in a way that Americans are not allowed to be different. And I think that that's what also gave me license to be me, because it's like, oh, it's just an English thing, and they didn't know anything about England, so who knows? Just in terms of the way I dress, you know, I didn't wear 10 feet of makeup, which is what everyone else was doing. I just wore a pair of shorts and rocked up to class, and do you know what I mean? It was a different way of being. But I think my otherness sort of protected me in some way, that I didn't have to conform, and there wasn't an expectation that I should do that. It certainly protected me in the prison when I was working with young men who were in prison, And the fact that I was English was a kind of novelty. And they kind of gave me a little bit more leeway, in a sense, to be different, because they didn't really understand where my difference was coming from. But it was sort of okay for me to be different, I think.
And we're going to end the first period right there. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah. So I suppose I always ask this, what like what guests would do during an intermission to have a break between kind of stuff, between
Okay.
playing
Cup of
what
tea.
a cup of tea. Yeah. Some ice hockey players used to have a coffee and a cigarette back in my day. So
Excellent.
what
That's
you
good.
were but Misha, let's just get straight into the second period. Because I want to go from like this. Every time I talk to you, I'm kind of getting a little bit deeper into this. What's building this woman? This woman who I know to be extremely resilient and teaches and coaches resiliency, and as he guiding me even in building and reading books on what resiliency is. But I just see this really determined young woman, now going to Florida, and I'm trying to give you hints around, or not hints, but suggestions around things that would really get to me if it was in, Southern Florida in those times where growing up in Canada, extremely misogynistic, especially in the American football world. The cheerleaders, the gymnasts, like I say, the women were sexualized in sport, right? It's Sonia Henning, the first figure skater that was always, was always pretty she is. And,
Sure.
there
Sure.
was, so where's your drive to kind of give, I suppose, your voice as a woman in sport? Where does that start to develop?
I mean, I think it was that I didn't think I shouldn't be there. I never thought I shouldn't be there. Um, and I guess the bit that I loved was the sport itself, the aesthetic of it, the possibility of it, the working with people to achieve something, the creation of new things. That's kind of what I really like. So it's interesting, isn't it? I kind of looking back on myself then and going, I wonder what the Americans made of me. They probably thought, who's this strange person? Because I was pretty sure of myself. You know what I mean? I was, as when you know nothing, you kind of go, yep, sure, this is okay. I mean, listen, don't get me wrong. There were times when it was really hard, particularly because I was skint and didn't have any money to eat and various other bits and pieces. But in terms of that kind of learning and understanding, that was good because it was anchored in a context. It also, I didn't find it very difficult. It was quite easy.
Were you scared ever?
Scared. Sure. Yeah, when I first arrived there, I'm like going, oh my God, what's this like? I don't know what I'm doing because it's uncertainty. And of course, on your own, being in the middle of nowhere, don't know anyone, all the rest of it. What's that like? And of course there were moments where I'm, not sure. But I guess you kind of navigate through it. You're there for a reason, I guess.
When as a someone who's learning how to be how to be a sports psychologist and to be a teacher, what were the first things that you were starting to go, I'm going to take this that I'm learning now and I'm going to start implementing it in my life and in the teachings of others, and all the athletes that I coach, the young sports psychologists even that you coach nowadays? When were the first learnings, I suppose, the things that you started to learn that you wanted to be able to start passing on to people?
So I guess it sort of started really with my undergraduate dissertation, where I'm starting to go. I did the research, I found the results, and thought, well, then everyone's got to learn how to do imagery. So I immediately incorporated it into my coaching, and I guess that's it. When I came back, I started looking at some of these tools, and sports psychology then was very, very different from how it is now. Very, very different. And so I did sort of bring some of that stuff back. I remember going to somebody in the then, I guess it'd be the equivalent of the English Institute of Sport, and talking about sports psychology and saying, I want to do this. And I remember another classic comment. I don't know what you think you'll be able to do, but that's something for America, and we don't do that here. See you later. Okay, great. So it's when I speak about the fact that I literally was at the beginning of the profession in the UK, I literally was at the beginning of the profession in the UK. It didn't exist. It didn't have a form, it didn't have a shape, it didn't have a name, it didn't have a training. It was people who were sort of doing bits of sports psychology, who were working with athletes and trying to do things in a different way. And I remember the British Olympic Association set up the first psychology advisory group, and I sat on that group, and there were 8 of us, me and, of course, 8 men. No change there. And the reason I was there was I was doing some work with fencers, and I'd been to World Championship with fencers and tried to. I was doing some work with fencing, and you had to be what's the word? Kind of recommended by an Olympic sport in order to be on the advisory committee. So that's how I kind of got on that advisory group. And that was the first ever group of English sports psychologists trying to look at the psychology of performance and how we should integrate it and what that thing should be. And I guess that, expanded and grown ever since.
Mm. So what decade would that have been? So we're looking at now Great Britain in the 90s?
Late 80s.
Yeah, which is when I came here, which is when I think it was the start of the Premiership, right? In football. And then only a few years later, Sky Sports started getting involved. Money changed everything. Sport changed in this country, vast swaths in the early 90s, early to mid 90s. So I can see now all of a sudden, the sports psychology is starting around that time. And this is something we had a conversation about the other day, where it's like, how have coaches learned how to coach? If only, 4 decades ago, we're starting to look at an athlete as an athlete-centered or a holistic being, whereas before they were just a slug of meat. And, the history and the coaching, coming from these archaic methodologies of fear-based, right? Power down driven coaching. You got to do this. If your hands aren't bleeding, you're not showing me enough commitment. And, if you don't throw up at the end of this skate, you're not showing me enough commitment. And don't even bother taking your skates off. Go walk up and down those stairs until you throw up. Don't cry if there's no crying on this team. Pull up your bootstraps, stop your whining, play through the pain, all of these things, right? I wish I would have written them all down before this talk. But all of these things that people are taught kind of post World War II Churchwellian sayings, of what we've got to do or die and bleed and all this kind of stuff. When did you really feel, I suppose, that was wrong and harmful and creating trauma?
Okay, so I never coached like that, ever. And I guess when I came back from America, I carried on coaching. I was a national coach by the time I was 24. I had kids in the British Championships. I had kids competing in Europeans, World Championships, etc. And kids that I started coaching when they were like 7 or 8, and I'm still coaching them 10 years later. So that is an absolute partnership. And so the club that I coached and ended up running, so I'm running a club and hosting international competitions, and I'm like 24. Sure, go ahead, do it. I was labeled a maverick coach by people in British gymnastics. I was told I was doing it wrong. They couldn't understand how I was doing it.
How were they doing it?
Oh, they're doing power over coaching, punishment.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, all of that.
Define it, I suppose. Give it some words.
You mess up your routine, you give me 300 press ups, you know, humiliating, getting kids to stand in front of them, giving them the hairdryer, you know, that expression when coach yells at a kid. And that never was right for me. I never did that. I mean, but what was interesting is that, but I still had very high expectations, and the kids that I coached did really, really well. So I'm kind of going, well, you know, I don't want to coach like that. You know, that's not comfortable for me. I want to be. For me, it was about a partnership, creating a partnership, giving them a voice, asking their opinions. So they would always be, you know, they compete, they perform a routine, and then I'd say, well, what do you think? And I remember a kid who was new to our club, and I asked her the question, and she thought it was a trick question. She didn't know what to say. I'm going, no, really, tell me what you think, because she was worried that if she says the wrong thing, there'll be some consequence. And I'm going, well, you've just done the routine. How did it feel to you? Because I'm not doing the routine, you are. So if it's not feeling right for you, or if there's certain places that you think, no, this doesn't flow, or we need to change this, then we need to talk about it, because it's your routine, not mine. And she was really flabbergasted by that. And actually, that particular gymnast ended up being a co-author of one of the first papers that we wrote on emotional abuse. Her name's Nicola Dunn, and she ended up studying it, and we did research on it because she'd experienced the other side of it, which was damaging and brutal.
Yeah. I really don't think that the public or people in general are, you know, we watch sports all the time. But like you say, the emotional and the physical traumas that are created by outdated, well, they should never have existed, coaching techniques, which are still implemented today. So we can get into that in a little bit, but let's talk about your career and how now you're 24, coach, also doing sports psychology. Where do things start to grasp, gain another kind of level of your evolution, and you're getting into football and other sports, and you're balancing academia with practicality. So how did that weave with you, and how did it all?
So I always coached. So I carried on coaching always. I was then starting to teach at then West London Institute, which then became Brunel University. And they had undergraduate programs where sports psychology, motor learning, more motor learning than sports psychology. But then I became a lecturer. I also was working for something called the National Coaching Foundation. And the National Coaching Foundation was a really important change in terms of understanding coach education. So what the National Coaching Foundation was set up for was to support coaches at all levels. And part of what they did was to offer them additional learning that they wouldn't get from passing the coaching badge, right? So a coaching award is the how-to of coaching. So you're teaching a cartwheel on a beam. These are the things you have to look like. This is how you spot the how of coaching. But what they did is they created a whole suite of supporting things. So it was around nutrition, maybe around physiology, around this, and psychology was part of that. And I ended up writing courses for the National Coaching Foundation and delivering them to a whole range of coaches in a whole range of different situations. So this was now starting to change and get an understanding that coaches are a profession, because of course the majority of coaching was done for free. I never got paid as a coach, or barely. Do you know what I mean? I could not have made it then my income. It wouldn't have paid peanuts in gymnastics. That's different now. You can kind of earn more money from it. So it was always earning tiny amounts of money. So most of the coaches were volunteers. But so it's like, how do you get an educated volunteer workforce? And the National Coaching Foundation was really influential in doing that. And Sue Campbell led it, and she's now a superpower driver in the FA. But yes, she was part of that.
that was part of your journey too, getting involved in women's football and the Lionesses. How did that all develop?
So I was asked by the FA advertised that they wanted 3 sports psychologists to write coaches, to write sports psychology for coach education. And I applied. I think there were, I don't know, 100 people, and I got it. I think the only woman there who did. And it's interesting because you talk about resilience, and I think part of the reason that I got the job was because of what happened in my interview, right? So I rocked up to my interview. I had my memory stick. I'm ready to go. Their computer system doesn't work. I'm like, okay, all right, no problem, I said. I've got it on an overhead, so I can do my slides on an overhead. And they went, sorry, we haven't got it. I went, no problem. I printed it out and I gave it to everyone and then I just spoke to it. So I had nothing, no slides, nothing up there, and still did a presentation. And I think the fact that I could adapt, was agile, got on with it, wasn't phased, just did it anyway, I think was probably part of the reason that I actually got the job. So hey, sometimes adversity works in your favor if you can overcome it. And I didn't kind of go, oh my God, well, I can't do my presentation. Oh, I'm all over. I was like, yeah, okay, fine, I'll do this then. Oh, that's not going to work either. Oh, okay, well, I'll do this then. And just kind of rolled with the alternatives. So part of that was working with 2 colleagues, a guy called Rich Mullen and John Halston, Dave Halston, sorry, in writing coach education around sports psychology. And what we did was really innovative because also the way in which we created those courses were interactive. Now, before that time, FA did not know what interactive learning was. They had no bloody clue. So our courses not only became a model for the information, but also for delivery style and inclusive and experiential learning. So all of these kind of psychological principles we were embedding. And then, so part of that, I was in and around the FA, and then I was asked by Hope Powell whether I would be the sports psychologist for the women's team. So that's how that came about.
So you're now writing programs to help coaches become better coaches, more, I imagine, athlete-centered, focused approach, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
How innovative was it that at the time? Like where were coaches going, well, this is just,
Oh, there was resistance. There definitely resistance. I mean, a moment that kind of demonstrates resistance and sexism all in one beautiful moment. I was delivering a coach education program over a couple of days, I think, and there was me and 80 men. That was often how it was. I'm the only woman in the room. And somebody stood up from the back and said, I don't know who the hell you are, but what the hell are you going to teach me about football? Who are you? Right? So I kind of replied, well, we've just started this course. Why don't you come back to me in 2 days' time and let's have a conversation about this after you've actually experienced what I've got to share with you. So that shut him up for a minute. We introduced really new concepts. So things like I did a lot of the work on developmental psychology as well, so they understood kids, because a lot of it was they were working with young people, but they'd have no education in their badges about child development, cognitive development, introducing concepts about understanding intelligence and how what football, they use this language, football intelligence, but what is it? How do you understand it? What does that look like? And also how they change their own behavior and how that impacts on the people that they're working with. So all of these kind of things were part of the curriculum, really, and we taught it. And on the then Youth Coaching Award, I think I delivered like 3 days. They go away for a week, and I was delivering it for 2 or 3 days as part of that. So I had to be a pretty skilled presenter to do all of that as well.
So this skilled presenting has gotten you into some, you've been doing some amazing work. I know you've been the sports psychologist at a couple of very big football teams, and you are, at Brunel University, you're teaching sports psychologists, and you're getting a a cohort every year. And so, I suppose as we're coming to the end of the second period, is like, what have you needed to have happen in your life to get to where you are now, and how have things, what are the major things that you've seen shift in sports? And I suppose in a way, can you now define what sports psychology is to you right now?
Okay, let me go backwards first. I think so. Now there are many changes. So I wrote one of the first sports psychology master's programs, didn't exist before. Both the big kind of organisations, BASES, British Association of Sport and Exercise Sciences, and BPS, the British Psychological Society, have now training courses so that you can become an accredited sports psychologist. So you're recognised as a practice psychologist, which means that you are allowed to use the title. So it's now a kind of professionally endorsed profession, to use that word twice, but whereas previously it wasn't, nobody supervised me. The minute I left my master's, it was down to you. Well, you have to create it. There was no one to talk to. There was nothing that you could do there. Whereas now, if I look at my trainees, they get a really good training program and they're taught how to be psychologists. And that was huge. That's hugely different, massively changed. And also people talk about sports psychology and people own the fact, people being people in sport, own the fact that they work with sports psychologists. The EPPP, which is the kind of the FA's plan for academy football, sports psychology is part of that. So there have been massive, significant changes. Obviously, we're not quite there yet. And I think that the profession itself is changing itself. It's reshaping itself. So for me, and again, this speaks to my history. I did a degree in psychology. So I'm a psychologist first who's working in sport. A lot of the sports psychologists did degrees in sports science. So they didn't actually have that kind of grounding in psychology and psychology theory and all the rest of it, because they do like a couple of modules on the sports science degree. So there's been this tension between the British Psychological Society, that psychology practitioners bit, and the sports scientist bit. And I think that now finally they're kind of figuring out how to talk to each other.
And that's a perfect end to the second period. So just a big breath, and because I know time is kind of something that we're both short of right now, but I'm going to get right into the third period. And this third period, Misia, okay, I'm going to just start the clock, and I'm going to start it like this.
Right.
3 years ago, I moved back to England after life transformational time in Toronto, where I finally asked for help. And I went through the recovery program, and I started this retribe organization where I was initially going to focus on ex-athletes who had stopped playing their sport and turned to alcohol, drugs, gambling as a coping mechanisms to deal with the bereavement and the loss of losing part of their identity. And a woman who I ended up starting to do some work with in advertising because I needed a job, said, "Nick, you need to turn on BBC Radio 4 right now. And there's this woman on, Dr. Misia Gervis." And I missed your talk, but I just got the recap, and Dr. Misia Gervis, and I Googled you, and I found your email address at Brunel, and I pinged you an email. And you graciously gave me some time to go to your office at the university, and we had, again, common friends. You know, I dated one of your ex-students back in the late 90s. She was 27. Don't worry about it. It wasn't that like, and of course I worked with some of the people that you coached with in television, and there was a bond and a connection there. And then you, over the last, you know my story inside and out as someone who grew up in a lot of fear, used sport as a coping mechanism, had traumas created in sport, playing through injuries when I should have had them looked after, that have still troubled me to this day. And we've come together to say, hey, how can we help people not go through what I went through? And we found also that the terminology that we use in sport is also the power systems and structures are very similar in the corporate world. So in that, we've got 20 minutes now to talk about, and you can use me as your kind of sounding board of examples about the creation of this program, Tough Through Tender. Again, building resiliency through compassion and vulnerability, others non-trauma creating methods in these two environments that are so kind of intrinsically woven through language, to give people, more balance in their lives. So first of all, I'm gracious that we met, and for all the things that you've taught me over the years. You're helping me transform all of the time. But as you saw me come into your office, what were the impressions? What were the thoughts of this guy who played sport, was on TV, became sober, and almost, because he almost died of alcoholism. And how did I suppose, let's get into our relationship and how it formed.
So I think the bit that comes before is that my PhD was all about abuse in sport, in emotional abuse. And that's, I talk about a power over culture, and that's what I became, if you like, an expert in. So I was talking about this stuff years and years and years ago. And I guess I understood when you were talking about your experiences in ice hockey. I went, yeah, okay, I've seen that. I know that. I understand that. So immediately it kind of cuts out the explanation. You don't have to explain that to me because I know it. I've seen it. I've lived it. And maybe that when you have shortcuts, you get into a relationship quicker because you don't have to do all of that unpacking and does she understand this? What's that like? So I think I recognized and knew your world very fast, and also understood the trauma of it. And I guess since then, I've done a lot of work. I keep expanding and developing my knowledge and my understanding, and kind of think about organizations. And this is where this applies in a corporate setting or in a sports setting, around what I call threat organized organizations. And this is where the whole organization is set up to be in a fearful state. People are worried about their jobs. So if you're looking at the stuff, people are worried about their jobs. There's a culture of power over. There's a culture of belittling, of you're not good enough, of people feeling small. There's all of those things inherently built into the culture. And you can see it, obviously in football, is writ large. But what happens in those spaces is that sometimes it becomes, accumulative micro traumas, which, as we know, if you think about it in relation to concussion. So we now understand that it is not just the concussion where you're knocked out cold that does the damage, but small little micro brain traumas accumulating cause damage in the, as detrimental as a big event. And that's what you kind of see in organizations. It's like how, everyone talks about stress in the workplace. Well, what's the culture? We've just had all of this huge stuff around what's happening in the police and the culture in the police. We know misogyny and racism and homophobic cultures they create damage because it's that trauma, it's that constantly kind of undermining, or you're not good enough, or not finding the words and feeling like you can't be yourself, you can't own what's actually happening to you, and you have no power. And it's interesting for me that everything is set up, in a notion of hierarchy, and the assumption is that you're better than that. And I'll give you another example of me, just so you understand me. There was a situation I got into with a boss at work, and it wasn't going well. And another colleague said to me, "But she's your superior. You have to listen to her." And I went, "No, no, 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 no. Nobody is my superior. No one's superior to me. It's just she happens to be doing that job." And he struggled to get his head around that. But that is always what I believe. Actually, it's like you're not better than me. You're just doing that, and I'm doing this. But there's no better than. You earn 20 times more than me. You're not better than me. You're just doing something in a space where you happen to be earning money. But that is, I guess, that kind of sense of self-worth that I have, which many organizations erode from people through the culture that is in place. And I guess the other thing is how we make sense of the bumps in the road changes whether we get over the bumps or whether they kind of knock us out and we become immobilized by them. And so for me, if you are able to have a different lens to look at things, to understand your own kind of responding mechanisms, what do you do? What's your go-to? How does that play out in terms of your behavior? And recognize that you do have choice in amongst all of this, then I think that there are ways forward, and also ways forward for organizations not to be fearful of all of this. What the fear is from the people above thinking that they're going to lose control. Well, then that just, for me, speaks of your vulnerability. Why do you need control? Why can't you create collaboration? Why can't you create trust? Why can't you create organizations where people feel safe? Because that's actually when you get the best from people. When people are fearful in that threat state, that's never going to happen. And if you want people to do their best work, you say you do, why would you not create conditions to enable that to happen?
It's really, one of the things that I was taught as a early business owner, in my mid to late 20s, and also in ice hockey coaching or other coaching, is this term, and you'll hear this: let them know who's the boss.
Yeah.
And to me, that is about being able to come into an environment, raise my voice, make a point, show some almost aggression, like a kind of beat. I've even heard of people manufacturing these kind of scenarios. So again, they can say, I've got to show them who's the boss. And I've told you this story now probably half a dozen times. It brings a tear to my eye. I was on the ice at the little ice rink in Sobel and doing learn to play. So kids who were, just mismatched hockey equipment, just there to have a bit of fun.
Yeah.
Kids goofing around in the corner. My immediate learned instinct through my old coaches was to raise my voice to the point where I could shock them so they could know, when I speak, you got to listen to me.
Yeah.
And this child's legs, they knocked together, I scared them.
Yeah, you created fear.
And this is, and me as a person who is trying to come into this new way of being, compassionate and kind. But Misia, there was just something in me that just reacted.
Because it was learned. It was I'm on the ice. This is what the ice looks like. This is what happened to me on the ice. So therefore, and that's how those cultures perpetuate. Because it's like you're in that place before you even realized you were there. And most people would have been in that place and would not have done what you did, which was to step away and reflect and go, oh my God, how did I get there? They would have just gone and carried on. And they're in life.
And I'm lucky that I could take that child to their side, and reflect on it and apologize profusely and say, I am sorry. I was wrong to have done that.
Yeah.
And, and I think that child learned, I learned, but there are so many people who would hear this and say, Nick, I don't raise my voice to anybody. I'm, kind of this not all men thing with regards to,
cool.
Yeah. So, and I think this is one of our battles going into those two environments of the sport culture and corporate cultures. We don't yell, we don't do this. But as you talked about, there are these microaggressions that can take place that are just in us. Mm-hmm. So I suppose what I want to try to get to now is this idea around unlearning. How can we create these environments for coaches and parents specifically to start to unlearn some of these things that are, as you see, I saw as a child. It's in me because my father raised his voice, my coach raised his voice, I'm going to raise my voice. what are some of the things that we can start to do to unlearn these? Is it, coming around to like awareness and accepting, and then, yeah, I don't want to be that reactive person. I want to be someone who can respond.
I mean, if you're not aware of your own behavior and what you're doing, you can't change anything. So it has to begin with it. But then also, I think we have to then have a repertoire of alternatives that people can actually use and understand. So, I mean, we were doing something, and we assume that, once you've told people, oh, you shouldn't, these are the things to avoid, do it differently, that they know what do it differently actually looks like. And I don't think they do.
Mhm.
I think we're naive if we think that. So I think we have to create opportunities for people to grow different skill sets, to have different kinds of communication styles. And most people who go to that power over mode is because they feel vulnerable themselves, and they feel like they have to prove themselves, or they have to say this. I mean, and it's small things that reveal it. You go around in a meeting and everyone says who they are. Well, who says their title and who says who they are? I noticed this in a meeting that I was in, and a number of my colleagues were very keen to give their labels. I'm this, I'm professor of that, I'm this. And I just went, I am Misia, because that's who I am. But those kind of things, it's like, do you have to prove yourself and show that you have this label, and this means this, and so those small little things can reveal quite a lot.
I'm getting the sense that, me as a person, and what I want to try to help people understand is that there's a lot of work that needs to happen on self as a parent and as a coach, so that you can, be that resource for your children or for the young athletes. Or, I know we're again sport, but I still want to stay into corporate culture around the ideas of, of that power down kind of thing, and being the boss. But I suppose what am I trying to say here is that, yeah, this, as we mentioned, this bit of unlearning, and these titles are all based around fear. So how do you help somebody recognize that their behavior is based around fear if they say, I'm not scared of anything?
Um, because the thing is, this is that you have to strip it back a little bit and kind of think about what makes them feel safe. And if you ask people questions like, okay, where do you feel safe? And it might be, oh yeah, I feel safe when I'm in my family. How do you behave with your family? Is it the same as what you do when you're at work? Are you the same person? Do you come in and organize your home like this and power over and all the rest of it? Not quite sure where I was going with that, but I think it's about awareness of how you feel in those moments. And also, we have theories that can also help people navigate through that and understand. So we can use things like polyvagal theory to help people go, oh, which state am I in? Am I in shutdown? Am I kind of in that fear, flight, fright place? Or am I actually in a pretty calm, focused place, able to do things? And if you're not in that ventral vagal place at the top, where you can be calm, where you can see stuff, what's going on for you? And of course, we move through these places all the time, but it's about, if we're in a threat organization, the organization has to recognize that that's what it's creating. Yeah. And what tends to happen is that we go, okay, the organization is fine, but oh, Nick, you've got a problem with anxiety. It's your problem. Rather than saying, well, what is the organization? Well, what is it about us that means that this person is in a constant state of threat?
Yeah.
Different question.
And a lot of these organizations are run by men, and these men have had the same teachings that I've had. And I'll even make a reference to girlfriends. I was taught this. I never did. I don't think I did it. I was a bit different than some of my friends, but I was taught this phrase about treat them mean, keep them keen. and it's not just with regards to, you know, relationships, but people have that relationship with people on in sports organizations and in teams where we will purposely try to be deflective, or you know, what's that word I'm looking for, when you're kind of not really engaging with the person, you're
You're
kind of being
dismissive. Yeah,
dismissive and mean,
yeah, yeah, sure.
because you want them to have a human reaction, which is, why is this person not liking me? I'm going to try extra hard.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, so have you noticed that this is in this kind of trait is still in sport culture and corporate culture? And what are the kind of things that we can recognize in it where we can try to mold teachers and leaders and coaches in a way of, like, if you can show some vulnerability and some compassion, you'll get a better reaction and than by being mean to somebody.
I think I'd kind of ask them different questions around whether people feel safe in their organization, and what does that actually mean? What does that look like? You know, part of the reason that we all struggled in lockdown was the fact that we were disconnected from people, and we need people to make us feel safe. We need to feel connected. That's like a human imperative, if you like. So those things that are kind of people speak the words but they don't do the action. Yes, we're really open here. Okay, what does that look like? Oh, can the person who's working as the, I don't know, cleaner come in and say to the boss, do you know what? I think you need to sort out a different system for organizing your rubbish, because you're wasteful. Is that the power you have? I mean, very few organizations have that, I'm guaranteeing. So it's like valuing people in different ways, and valuing their expertise and their different perceptions, because we all look at life through different lenses, but truly allowing voices to be heard rather than just paying lip service to it. That's important, because when we're heard, when we're connected, when we feel safe, when we feel valued, then the organization gets the best out of me. I'm going to do loads for you. When I'm feeling none of those things, and by the way, it takes a long time to build that up, and it can be eroded really fast, really fast. Yeah.
So my main battle as my main hurdle or challenge as I bring Tough Through Tender to the world, you know, your all of your life work, you know, around resiliency, building and compassion and vulnerability. I Language is a challenge, is a hurdle that I have, because ultimately what I want to say to people, Misia, is that analogy that we talked about the other day about Rocky. You know, everyone thinks Rocky's some tough, you know, boxer who you know, but it's a love story.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, Rocky confides in Adrian. He'll be vulnerable and say, I'm scared, you know, and they'll have this confrontation. This matriarch with this beautiful power, is elevated and elevates him through love.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's something that if you know, if I go into corporations and sports organizations and I say, hey, me and Misia are going to come teach you guys about love, you know, I'm going to get laughed out of the building.
Of course, of course.
But we don't have, I suppose what it is that people have evidence of the collective success of elite athletes being brought there through, I would say, outdated, you know, forms of coaching that create harm. But they're like so scared to say, I'm not gonna deviate from the path and try to tap into this energy source of compassion and vulnerability and love, which can create more success that doesn't create any harm.
The problem is that in order to do that, you need people who are able to be almost like containers. You know what I mean? It's like when I'm working in therapy, it's like I become the container. I become the place that's safe. I become the anchor. And if you're in an organization and you look and you go, well, where are those people? And there are none there, you're not going to be able to do anything. So the spaces of being safe and what that looks like are important. And if people are struggling and they have limited resources themselves, then it's hard for them to be able to be that container, if you like, because you have to be pretty sure of yourself to be able to do that, you know. So it's tough going to be the container for other people's kind of vulnerabilities, but it's only once they feel the metaphorical I've got you, yeah, that actually then the healing begins, and the growth and the change, you know, because all of that stuff is about growth, is about change. And in whether it's performance in a corporate setting or performance in a sports setting, it is the same thing. It is about how people flourish, how people shift, how they move, how they change in a space that is literally able to support them. And I think that skill is really underrated and undervalued, because believe me, it ain't so easy to do.
But we're getting better at it. And I'm looking forward to this year and what we are going to be able to bring to people. This is, like I say, the first episode of this series where, Misia, I just wanted to let people get to know you, and also to, you know, some people hear me talking a lot, but now they can hear where all of this content and the creation and your life's work is being, you know, actioned in this program. So I'm very, very grateful for everything. We'll end the third period there, but I'm going to skip to a quick little overtime.
Extra time.
Just a little overtime
penalties.
Question.
You're going to penalties.
Misia, like I say, we've known each other for a few years now. I learn from you all the time, and I always want to. I kind of want to know, like, this is because you are this superwoman to me. You're tough. You're resilient. You have been a maverick. You've broken that. You've avoided walls and stepped over barriers, and you've done things that are trailblazing in your profession and what you do. Do you, as a symbol of resiliency, do you ever sit back and relax? Because I know where your office is, but do you ever sit in that front room, put your feet up, and say, "Wow, fuck, I'm proud of what I've done"?
Oh, very rarely. Very rarely. I think because I keep moving, I keep evolving, I keep changing, I keep doing that, and I guess I'm always excited about the next thing, and so I kind of don't do a lot of backward looking, if I'm honest. I kind of look at what's in front of me. So,
but if you could right now,
yeah,
let's look backward, right from the 11-year-old at Sobel to the 14-year-old teaching to the 21-year in Tallahassee to your mid to late 20s, you know, really getting stuck in with your learnings and then being able to teach, to working in professional football and at the highest levels at the FA, you know, and then to meeting me, which is a pinnacle, and creating Tough Through Tender. Sit back and reflect on that. And I'm just kind of interested to know the words that would come out of your mouth.
I mean, yeah, it's definitely been a journey. You know, it's been, and I kind of think about it as being, I've been privileged because I've been able to create something for myself. Do you know what I mean? And I've been able to do these different things and follow this different path and learn these different things and create new stuff. So I guess the core of what I do is creation, whether that's creating a new floor routine, creating a new program, creating a new bit of learning, creating, who knows, it's all about that. And I guess that's what keeps me interested. So I have to, in order to do what I do, I have to really care about it. And I care about the people I work with. And I think that I remember years ago, somebody who was giving me feedback on one of the courses that I was presenting for the National Coaching Foundation a long, long time ago. And they said, yeah, the thing that makes you different, Misia, is you really care. And that was like the biggest compliment ever. But I think it's kind of true. And I think people feel that when I'm working with them in whatever space that kind of manifests. I certainly never do it for the big bucks. That's certainly not what I'm doing stuff for. And I guess, yeah, it's nice to go, oh yeah, you've done some stuff. You've changed some things and things have moved. And yeah, you'd like to kind of think that the lovely thing about teaching is that you kind of, the people that you work with carry a little bit of you out into the world, and then they kind of take it with them. And so I think there's quite a few people out there who are doing that, taking a little bit of something with them, which is nice.
I think it's one of these things, like if I define self-esteem as how I see or feel about myself, for even 4 years into sobriety, I was 49 years old and I still didn't really feel great about myself until I wrote down on a piece of paper everybody who I'd sponsored through a 12-step program. And it was a lot.
Yeah.
And I looked and I remember just getting up and going into the bathroom, and these words came out of my mouth for the first time at 49. Nick, I'm proud of you.
Yeah.
And I think it's in these little efforts of selflessness, of giving, of caring, that we build self-esteem. So how do you see or feel about yourself?
Pretty good. Yeah, most of the time I'm kind of happy with, I'm kind of comfortable being the maverick. I wear that well, because then that means I can do the unexpected.
Okay.
And that's a nice place to be.
Well, you watch Top Gun, right?
Sure.
So I will be your goose, but just
Nice.
don't kill me.
I'll try not to.
Don't take this jet
I've
somewhere
got you. I'm a good container. It's okay. You're safe
don't
with
take
me.
don't take this jet into the danger zone. And maybe we'll get some references off Top Gun for that. But Misia, episode 1, Tough Through Tender, Critical Conversations, is in the can. I'd just like to thank you so much for everything you're doing, the changes that you're helping people go through, including myself, and how we aim to get out there and help people live more fulfilled lives. So thank you.
You're welcome. Been interesting reflecting back, I must admit. Not something I do very often.
Well, we'll do it again in a few episodes or a few series.
Okay.
But hey, listen, you're teaching me a lot, and I could ask some questions.
Good, sure.
But I was holding back because,
today.
not today, because I don't want to cry. And there you go. Thanks, Misia.
All right, my friend. Take it
Bye.
easy.
Bye.
We'll be in touch.
Yeah.